There is opportunity in every crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic has created a crisis for many small business owners that is unlike any other before. Now, entrepreneurs today are now faced with the challenge of identifying business opportunities that are valuable enough for customers to purchase despite facing a public health and economic crisis. We are now being joined by the founder of Naija Startups, Aramide Abe, and she is here to tell us about how small businesses can navigate this season successfully. Good morning to you, Aramide. Thank you so much for joining us. If we were to start with the challenges that businesses have been facing in light of this pandemic, what would you even start with? What, if you could highlight them, how has business life changed for people during this pandemic?
Okay, good morning. Thank you for having me. To your question about business challenges, there have been tons of business challenges because businesses have never experienced this before. Most businesses, especially the small businesses that we are dealing with in our community, challenges like, just no revenue coming in is one. So revenue, and then the second thing is with staff. So hiring and just managing staff, retaining staff is one thing, because if there's no revenue, then it's very difficult to maintain, employees. So entrepreneurs are constantly just looking at ways to support the employees without having to let them go. And in certain cases, of course, they will have to let them go if they're non-essential. So, of course, it's an unprecedented time that we're in, and there's just different challenges cropping up as we sort of watch things unfold. And I think one more challenge that a lot of businesses are facing is just the uncertainty. So it's different if you knew when this would end, but we just don't. So it doesn't help us in terms of planning. And so when it comes to scenario analysis, you just have to use the existing data really, and just hope that things unfold. But I think scenario planning is a good thing, where you can then say, okay, so in the worst case scenario, what happens? In this scenario, what happens? In that scenario, what happens?
So those that's what we'd like to know, with the different scenarios. And I wonder, what kind of scenarios are you seeing that could likely play out, and what opportunities could be derived from those scenarios that you would talk about, re-echoing what the CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele said only weeks ago, that a COVID-19 outbreak actually offers an opportunity for people to think outside of the box. Speak to that.
Yes, it does. He is right, the CBN Governor, because this is an opportunity where even employees or entrepreneurs, who have been in business can take a step back and think through their processes for one. So I guess one way is to even optimize your business, looking at structure and all the other things that happen behind the scenes. But even broader than that is looking at other ways to monetize what you do, or as a third option would be exploring new ways to make money. So as an event planner, for example, there's no events happening right now because of the lockdown. And so what that means is that you have to innovate. Do you then transition to digital to roll out digital events, or even think about other skills that you have as an entrepreneur that can help you make money or generate revenue and essentially profit? So I think the third one, which is it's more difficult because there's just so much stress and tension right now, uncertainty. And so there's anxiety coming up of, just rising up among people. And when there's a lot of anxiety, it's very difficult to be creative. So I'd say, what we advise a lot of SMEs that we engage with is, just take a step back, relax. And then when you do some introspection, you can then start thinking of creative ideas, and you'll be surprised how many ideas there are. I've seen business owners just totally transition into another direction in the last few weeks. I've also seen business owners embrace digital aggressively now that we have the pandemic and the lockdown. So those are my answers.
Do you think that the ease of people being able to put their fingers in different pots, for example, or navigate a different a completely different type of space is a privilege, because if you have the means or the funding or the access to the internet, it allows you to be able to flow into your entrepreneurial juices. But for people who might not be able to access those same types of privileges, how do you think they're able to navigate this time if they do want to become an entrepreneur?
That is a very great question, because when you think about entrepreneurs and SMEs in general, they're categorized into different sort of like classes. And then there's the very informal sector, right, which involves people who, I'd say maybe the grassroots, who depend on whatever they make per day to earn and feed. And so for them, in my mind, it's not very easy right now. And I think this is where the government actually comes in to then begin to introduce different types of interventions that will support these small businesses or business owners. And then to your other point about those who want to get into entrepreneurship, for example, if they weren't in business before and don't have access to digital, there are still businesses that you can get into. Just looking around now, we're beginning to identify gaps in certain systems because we're all at home, right? So whether it comes to food or mobility or just different types of services, some may not necessarily need technology, but on the whole, for anything to scale, technology definitely supports. So I'd say it depends, but for definitely the bottom of the pyramid class, the government intervention, imagine, that would support that group.
And speaking of government interventions, we do know that the Central Bank of Nigeria has earmarked some $100 million weekly for SMEs like yours, and of course to provide funds for school fees to be paid. And the Forex window has now been opened. People can now begin to buy the dollar, for the SMEs. What are your concerns, even as some of these positive moves by the central bank, is going on now? What are your concerns? Do you have any? And if you do, what would you do then to ensure that you go past whatever what's that word again? The obstacles that you might face in accessing some of those funds?
Okay, so from what I hear you say, you're asking two different questions. So in terms of uncertainty about the fluctuating exchange rate is one, and then the challenges or possibilities of accessing funds. So I'll speak to the first and then the second. So I was having a conversation this morning with another entrepreneur, and yes, we're all wondering what's going to happen with the exchange rate of the dollar. Of course, it's, as you know, as of yesterday when I checked, it was 450 naira to the dollar. Now, for SMEs who trade, I guess, globally or even do business here and have to pay for certain things internationally, then it's an issue for us. So one thing that we're looking at is just to wait and see and how things will play out. Of course, that means that the time lag then impacts business. So it's just thinking about creative ways to optimize or use the current, cash flow to continue to do business while we anticipate. Then your second question about accessing the interventions. If I hear you correctly, there have been SMEs in our network on our platform who have applied. Many of them have applied for the central bank NERSO loan, and some have even got calls from the intermediaries reviewing and screening them. So that's definitely happening. But of course, to even access that, you need to get to a certain point as a business and have all your books in order. So that is there for SMEs who can then tap into it.
Now, with the 37 million or so SMEs in Nigeria that actually contribute about 48 or so percent to the GDP, do you think that the $100 million weekly is a good place to start to begin to help SMEs like yours to get back your groove, so to speak?
Thank you for the question. I think governments on a whole across globally don't know the best way to do this right now. Everybody is in this together in the sense that we've never faced this before. So even from what the governments are doing and trying to think of ways to support SMEs, I'd say that's a good start. Yes, we do know that recorded there's 37 million SMEs, MSMEs in Nigeria as recorded. And realistically, I wouldn't say that is enough, but I do think it's a good start. There are some governments who haven't introduced SME interventions. There are other governments who have introduced way more than what we have done. But to start with, this is good. And I imagine that the government is dialoguing with key stakeholders in terms of ways to support SMEs, looking at getting all the feedback, looking at all the learnings from this. So to your point, yes, it's a good start.
I'm really interested to find out a bit more about Naija Startups itself. If you could give us some backstory on the idea behind Naija Startups and any difficulties you yourself has faced during this time.
Okay, thanks for the question. So we are an entrepreneur support organization and a virtual hub for SMEs, which means that we are a hub for business owners, stage agnostic, sector agnostic, although we engage with our SMEs digitally through virtual platforms. We started out as a directory in 2016, a business directory, and since then have grown based on all the learnings and listening to entrepreneurs to this entrepreneur support organization. So the key ways we support businesses is through 3 strategic pillars. The first is structure, getting them investable, scalable, exportable in terms of, workshops, training, advisory, due diligence. Then there's the capital aspect as well. So actually funding SMEs, introducing them to investors. That's already happening. And then the third is capability building and capacity building for the entrepreneurs themselves, because we find that a lot of the entrepreneurs who come into our network want to build themselves up as business leaders, want to be better at business, want to know how to deal with their boards properly, or communicate with their board, improve on their emotional intelligence, amplify themselves and what they do globally. And so I'd say we're the go-to. So I see ourselves as a one-stop shop for SMEs. The good thing about now is because we've always transacted or engaged with entrepreneurs digitally, it hasn't affected us too much, the pandemic. In fact, there's been more demand in terms of our offerings and wanting to join our community because of what we offer. So what we pride ourselves is the quality of the content that we share, quality of the opportunities, the access to the networks that entrepreneurs can get through us. And it's been quite an interesting journey.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Aramide, if you could just hold on your thoughts just there. We will continue our interview just after we take this very short break. To the morning show here on Arise News. We are still joined by the founder of Naija Startups, Aramide Abe, and she's here to tell us about how small businesses can navigate this season, which has been dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic successfully. Now, Aramide, thank you so much for staying with us. I wanted to ask your opinion on how people at home can change their work habits, like identify to us what the difference between working smart and working hard is, and how can people navigate that difference?
Yes, I think we've all had to go through this drastic change. So it's been interesting even learning to work virtually and remotely compared to working in an office, even though that's something that I've done for some time. So working virtually has not been too difficult, but I've learned to sort of improve my productivity. So I probably will use some of my own learnings to share how to work smart versus hard. Interestingly, speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, they seem busier now that they're working at home because there's tons of webinars and different deliverables, or if you're in a corporate environment, there's a lot of to-dos for some reason. And maybe some organizations don't have the necessary virtual culture that would help you adapt easily. So it sometimes comes across quite intrusive based on, just accessing you at any time. But I think for entrepreneurs in general, how to work smart virtually versus hard, one of the things I would say is definitely plan your time. If you're not very disciplined with your time, then you find that then the lines are blurred and you're working all hours of the day. You haven't set out time for family or set out time for yourself, or any meditation like that. So I'd say definitely, have time where you get up in the morning, go through your general routine as though you were going to work, and then, set out time, sit down somewhere and then do your work, take a break, get up, walk around, and then also close your day at the time you're going to close your day, as opposed to, just letting it extend, because it does impact you generally health-wise over a long period. So that's one thing, which is really like plan your time and be guarded about your time. The second thing I'd say is, at least from what I've seen, when it comes to communication, there's tons of, like I said, tons of webinars, there's emails coming all the time. One thing I've done well is been able to just allocate time to do emails. Otherwise, I'm spending time checking emails all the time. And then in the back of that is also deciding what kind of webinars that I'm going to join. I have access to lots of webinars because of, by virtue of what I do, I share information with SMEs. So I get literally like access to 50 webinars, different topics per day. That doesn't mean that I personally go through all of them. I am very strategic in deciding what is going to impact me and what's of value to me. And then, signing up to that, or saying, okay, I'm going to listen to 3 webinars per week or something like that. So that's another thing. And then I also say this is a good time to, just develop yourself. So for people who don't even read, I think this is a good time to spend time reading, even if it's like 2 pages a day or 2 chapters a day. Just do some reading and develop yourself, and you'll be surprised what kind of skills you pick up, or just what you find out. So those are the 3 things that come to mind.
And let's talk about another group of people who would be seriously concerned about their jobs. A lot of people are going to be furloughed, hoping to get back their jobs post-COVID. But there are those who will lose their jobs permanently. What do they need to do now very, very quickly? What would be the low-hanging fruits that they can, quickly latch on to ensure that they actually survive this COVID period economically, financially, and post-COVID?
Yeah, just hearing that, I was reading an article this morning about one of the financial institutions letting so many people go. And it's quite sad, to be honest, but I think some organizations just have to bite the bullet. I don't know the circumstances of that situation, but the way people can begin to embrace other opportunities, I think they need to recognize that now opportunities have been democratized. So Nigeria is not your only boundary anymore. And so if to say that, a lot of people are going to be working digitally or virtually now, it means that opportunities will begin to arise very quickly online. So it means you can actually work for an organization based in Dubai if you have the right skills, and they're allowing people to work virtually. Remember that now virtual is a thing. It's going to be a major thing now. So for someone who has a skill set, they can either, top up that skill set with online courses. There's tons of online courses that are free online. There's business schools across the world that are providing free content to people, top business schools as well. So top up your skill sets and then learn a new skill if you want. Then also work on your LinkedIn profile, right? Because people are on LinkedIn all the time, just looking at people's skills and people's just profiles. So you don't just sit back, just engage and look for opportunities. And then the other thing is then to look for opportunities. So begin to search, begin to network, albeit virtually, but begin to network and find out what is out there. And so I just want to reemphasize that because there's the whole pandemic and virtual is now at the forefront of everyone's minds and agendas, it does mean that even a business can begin to transact or market to someone in another country when they couldn't before. The same thing with a 9-to-5er. They can actually get a job virtually. Then, of course, locally as well, I think the key thing is just to wait and see, because there's just so much uncertainty across every single sector. So there's no magic solution or hard and fast rule.
So for a small business, this may not necessarily be the time to, put money into any kind of investment, no matter how small. When I hear you say, just, wait and see because of the uncertainties. But is there a better time than now to begin to think about pooling resources together, talking about SMEs collaborating and bringing a stronger front?
Okay, so, I am one for testing ideas. So I wouldn't say don't try something out. But of course, you know that cash is really the focus now for businesses, and conserving that cash is the main thing, or should be the main thing if people aren't doing that right now. So if you're conserving cash, you don't want to be, dishing cash out on something that may not be viable. So if you're going to even test any idea or launch any idea, I'd say test it first, run a pilot, run a survey, get a sense. And even when you run a survey and get data, it's skewed to this current situation. So it's not necessarily data that will reflect post-pandemic. So I think it's important to be careful. And so, yes, it's important to test your ideas. I can't remember what your other question was.
Yes,
sorry.
the need to collaborate at a time like this.
Okay. Yes. So again, with collaboration, which is partnership, essentially, you can, and it's good to collaborate and look at economies of scale or where the synergies are. But again, because of the current situation, I'd say also tread that carefully. So I think everything we're just doing with caution. It doesn't mean that anything is impossible per se, but just tread with caution with regards to any strategic decision you want to take in your business or as an individual.
On the topic, on the topic of treading with caution, we're hoping that we get to the other side of this pandemic as soon as possible. But in terms of business appetite or entrepreneurial appetite, what do you think the lasting legacy of COVID-19 will be on people wanting to set up shop and start up their own businesses? How will that appetite change after this experience, do you think?
Yeah. And that brings me to that point about being able to conserve cash and, people will begin to identify where there are growth opportunities. For example, if you're able to really play in the agriculture value chain, and in my mind, that is really the future of this country, even though it's yet to be, explored in its entirety. So for something like that, if you have good processes and operations and just a good acumen, the right team, you can really, really benefit from that. And so I think, yes, entrepreneurship is something that would always be there. People are not going to stop running businesses because there's always going to be a need. I think it's just important for people who then begin to just prioritize what they're focusing on. And then, of course, digital is a good thing, skills acquisition. I came across a website where they're running events now online. So those kinds of things, just innovation would be a major thing. And especially for us in Africa, going back to my first point, agriculture, food, and innovation.
Very quickly before we go, as startups, Naija Startups, personally for you, what are you preparing for post-COVID without giving us your business secrets?
What are we preparing for?
Yeah,
definitely
post-COVID. What kind of measures are you putting in place, so that you can hit the ground running, like they say, once COVID is behind us?
Yeah, so this has been a good opportunity to see what the need is. And we find that there's a Pan-African need for what we do. So scaling across Africa very quickly and having that strategy brought forward would be something that we'll be looking at, because we're already beginning to see some of that, like some people from Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda joining our community.
All right, Aramide Abe, founder of Naija Startups. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Some good tips there.
Definitely.